There was a psychologist named David Bakan who in 1958 wrote a book called Sigmund Freud and the Jewish Mystical Tradition. His core argument was that Sigmund Freud was extremely influenced by the Kabbalah, and not just any aspect of Kabbalah, but especially Shabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank's ideas, the two prophets who had the biggest messianic movements in the history of any prophet, and that includes Jesus. Yet that didn't make in our history books now, did it? Now, this is very important, especially because this book was a bold move for two reasons. This book was published only 13 years after the Holocaust, and second, because this book was actually written by a Jewish man. By the way, compulsory reading if anyone is interested to understand the Jewish mystical tradition. Again, we can talk about this in a more detailed video if you guys want, but be very clear that these two dark movements have been suppressed by the world media and our history books. Now, another very important person, and I know I'm dropping a lot of names here, but it's important. In the story of Sigmund Freud, his name, Jeffrey Massoon. Let's talk about it for a second. Why is this guy so important? Well, in 1981, he was hired by Kurt Eisler with the approval of Sigmund Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, as a projects director of the Sigmund Freud archives. This is a very big deal, you guys. This man had access to everything. We're talking his personal and professional accounts, all his letters that he wrote to his colleagues and his friends, his personal diary, his thoughts, everything. And well, he found out things that, well, he shouldn't have. He was later fired, and get this, the whole psychology community, the noble psychology community, the oh so kind psychology community disregarded his work. His mentor, Kurt Eisler, turned on him. His membership in the psychoanalytic organizations effectively ended. So what did he find out in these archives that even his livelihood was taken from him? What exactly was in these letters that changed his life so dramatically? Let's do a bit of time travel then, shall we? In 1895, Freud came up with a theory called the seduction theory. Now, what was this theory? Seduction theory talked about the kids who grew up with childhood trauma and developed so because of the sexual abuse they faced by their own parents growing up. Kids were getting badly abused. Some of them even had physical injuries. So these weren't just verbal reports. Many of these people who were diagnosed with so-called hysteria were actually victims of child molestation and incest. He published this theory hoping that this would effectively help the victims and evolve the field of psychoanalysis. Boy, was he wrong. Freud at the time got a lot of backlash for this. All these rich clients, they were like, how dare he speak the truth? We have our moral right to abuse our own kids. These are our kids. We're supposed to have incest with them. So as these stories usually go, and as history is evidence, the most noble men often bend for money and not for truth. And so to satisfy his rich clientele, he delicately, oh so softly suppressed this truth and replaced it with much darker and much sinister lie. He called this lie Oedipus complex. Get this, Oedipus complex is this idea that a child is always attracted to their opposite sex parents, and that childhood trauma is nothing but a misinterpretation of those feelings. These kids had a deep sexual urge towards their parents, but because they had to repress it, as a result, sexual repression made them think that they were abused when they weren't. Oedipus complex basically says that these victims aren't actually victims, and these kids aren't actually abused. It's all a fantasy created in their own head. So when Massoon read about all this in his archive, he decided to bring them out to the field of psychology, to publish all the archives, because even he understood how dark this was. As a result, he was fired. Now, I know psychoanalysis isn't bad. I know psychology is in place to help people. But who is challenging these beliefs? Do we want people to get help or get sicker? Do we want victims to have these problems addressed or have them gaslit? When I read this case of Sigmund Freud, I was constantly gasping. Some of these things actually made me hyperventilate. Because look, some professions are in place to help people and elevate them from their suffering. But these are the same professions built on the rock of such dodgy foundations and on men with checkered past, on ideas that are just pure filth. When these things are refuted, these same professionals ban them, protest them. So am I to think that I can believe in something like this? You would think a profession that is solely based on understanding people, consoling people, making people strong emotionally and mentally, collectively decided to overlook this massive blunder. To this day, students of psychology study Oedipus complex in school, and my question is why?